Lady Sarah Chatto did not escape Princess Margaret with a scandal. She escaped with silence. There was no furious interview, no palace accusation, no public revenge. Her retreat was slower, calmer, and far more revealing. She moved away from the emotional storm that had shaped her childhood, and everyone who knew that royal house understood why. Sarah was born into rank servants, royal rooms, family rituals, and cameras beyond the gates. But the deepest lesson of her childhood was not privilege. It was distance. Distance from noise, distance from performance, distance from a mother who could fill a room with beauty, then leave everyone waiting for the next change in the air. Princess Margaret had been shaped by wounds long before Sarah was born. Margaret Rose was born in 1930, the second daughter of the Duke and Duchess of York. Nobody expected her father to become king. Elizabeth was careful and dutiful. Margaret was bright, sharp, charming, and dangerous in the way a child becomes dangerous when adults laugh at everything she dares to say. In 1936, King Edward VIII gave up the throne to marry Wallis Simpson. Margaret's father became King George VI. Elizabeth became the future queen. Margaret became the spare daughter in a family that had just learned how dangerous personal desire could be. From that moment, royal love was never only love. It could become a crisis, a headline, and a threat to the crown. After the war, Margaret fell in love with Group Captain Peter Townsend, a decorated war hero in the royal household. He was steady, handsome, and impossible for the palace to accept. He was divorced. He had children. The family feared another crisis after the abdication. By 1955, after years of waiting and pressure, Margaret announced that she would not marry him. The public saw sacrifice. The palace saw relief. Margaret saw the loss of the one future that felt entirely hers. Her sister had the throne. Her mother had the memory of King George VI. Margaret had duty jewels and a wound that never fully closed. After that, she became more dazzling but less reachable. Then, Antony Armstrong Jones entered her life. Tony was a photographer, an artist and a man who did not seem afraid of a princess. He looked at Margaret, challenged her, and made her feel alive. Their engagement was announced in February 1960. On May 6, 1960, they married at Westminster Abbey in the first royal wedding broadcast on television. Margaret wore the Poltimore tiara, a diamond tiara she had bought herself. That choice mattered. She could have borrowed from royal vaults, but she chose something that was hers. It was a declaration in diamonds. If the family had denied her one life, she would stage another one under lights, cameras, and admiration. The marriage began in glamour. Kensington Palace became a world of artists, actors, writers, aristocrats, smoke perfume, and late conversations. Tony loved freedom and talent. Margaret loved beauty and rank. Both loved admiration. Neither was built for second place. Their son David was born in 1961. Tony became Earl of Snowdon that same year. Then, on May 1st, 1964, Sarah Frances Elizabeth Armstrong Jones was born at Kensington Palace, 7th in line to the throne. The public saw a stylish royal family. Inside, the marriage was already cooling. Sarah and David grew up in apartment 10, surrounded by nannies, servants, lessons, rules, and the careful choreography of palace life. They had comfort, beauty, and access. They also had parents whose affection was becoming a battlefield. Tony gave his children one lasting gift. He encouraged making things. David would become a furniture maker. Sarah would become a painter. For Sarah, art was not decoration, it was refuge. A flower did not ask whether she was royal enough. A table did not demand loyalty. A landscape did not force her to take sides in a marriage. Margaret lived by intensity. She could be generous, funny, loyal, and magnetic. She could also be cutting, proud, demanding, and difficult to please. Her pain had not softened her. It made her determined never to be treated as ordinary. Motherhood had to fit around that need, not replace it. Children understand the weather of a home. Sarah learned when a room was safe, when laughter had an edge, when adults were pretending, and when silence meant a quarrel had passed through. She learned to observe. She learned to step back. And Queen Elizabeth II quietly showed her a different way to survive. To the public, Elizabeth was the sovereign. To Sarah, she was also an aunt. Elizabeth did not dazzle like Margaret. She contained herself. She continued. She did not turn every disappointment into theatre. To a child raised near volatility, steadiness can feel like affection. Margaret burned outward. Elizabeth endured inward. Sarah watched both and chose her own answer. School gave her air. Beadle's in Hampshire was progressive artistic and far less rigid than palace life. Sarah entered a world where a royal name could create curiosity, but it could not finish a painting. Art demanded patience, discipline, and earned value. It asked her to work, not to perform. Then Margaret's private life became public humiliation. In the early 1970s, she met Roddy Llewellyn. He was young, handsome, charming, and much younger than she was. Margaret was in her 40s. Roddy was in his 20s. On Mustique, where Margaret had built her villa, Les Jolies Eaux, she found sun-freedom friends and escape from a marriage that had become a duel. In 1976, photographs of Margaret and Roddy on Mustique were published. The Queen's sister was seen holidaying with a much younger man while still married to Lord Snowdon. The newspapers had everything they wanted: royalty, marriage, sun, swimwear, age difference, betrayal, and scandal. For Sarah, around 12 years old, it was a lesson she would never forget. In March 1976, Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon announced their separation. The language was controlled, but the meaning was plain. The marriage was broken. In 1978, the divorce became final. The wedding millions had watched in 1960. After all the warnings about Peter Townsend, the approved marriage had failed anyway. For Sarah, the divorce came during adolescence. She could have become rebellious. She could have chased attention. She could have turned her mother's scandal into her own story. She did none of that. She went deeper into art school and privacy. This is the essential point. Sarah did not flee privilege. She fled chaos. In 1981, Sarah stood inside another royal fairy tale when Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer at St. Paul's Cathedral. Sarah was one of the bridesmaids. The wedding was watched by hundreds of millions around the world. The public saw romance. Sarah saw the warning. Her own parents had begun before cameras too, with jewels, cheers, and blessings. Visibility had protected nothing. Daniel Chatto arrived from the creative world Sarah had chosen. He had acted painted and came from a theatrical family. He understood performance, but did not appear to confuse performance with life. He did not arrive as a scandal. He did not seem to want Sarah as a stage. After a childhood thick with charm that had not kept anyone safe, steadiness mattered more than sparkle. Sarah and Daniel married on July 14, 1994, at St. Stephen Walbrook in the City of London. It was not Westminster Abbey. It was not St. Paul's beneath national expectation. Sarah wore a simple Jasper Conran dress with flowers in her hair. Queen Elizabeth II attended. The Queen Mother attended. Prince Charles attended. Diana attended. Princess Margaret was there too, carrying pride, memory, regret, and love. The wedding sent a clear message. This is family, not national drama. This is marriage, not spectacle. This is joy, and it does not need a parade to prove itself. Daniel did not become a prince or an earl. Sarah became Lady Sarah Chatto, not because the marriage raised her, but because it allowed her to settle more fully into herself. In July 1996, Sarah gave birth to Samuel David Benedict Chatto. In 1999, she gave birth to Arthur Robert Nathaniel Chatto. Her sons had royal blood and a famous family tree, but Sarah gave them something rarer than rank. She gave them scale. Royalty was part of life. It was not all of life. Their home was not organized around scandal applause or one person's mood. On August 31, 1997, Princess Diana died in Paris after a car crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel while being pursued by photographers. She was 36. Britain erupted in grief. Sarah was not at the center of that storm, but she understood it. Fame could become pursuit. A royal woman could become a symbol, then be crushed by the appetite that made her famous. Margaret herself was becoming fragile. In 1998, she suffered a mild stroke on Mustique. In 1999, she badly burned her feet in a bath, damaging her mobility. In early 2001, she suffered another stroke. The woman who once made rooms wait now had to wait for her own body. Illness stripped glamour down to the frame. Sarah's distance changed in that period. It did not disappear, but it became more compassionate. She had never advertised resentment, so she did not need to perform forgiveness. She could simply help. The daughter who had protected herself from Margaret's force could now come close because that force had become need. She could serve without surrendering. She could love without being ruled. Princess Margaret died on February 9, 2002 at King Edward VII's Hospital in London. She was 71. Her death was linked to another stroke and heart complications. The public remembered the young princess. The Peter Townsend romance, the 1960 wedding, the island scandal, and the difficult sister of the Queen. Sarah remembered the mother behind the headline. Margaret's funeral was held at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, on the 50th anniversary of King George VI's funeral. Her ashes were later placed near her parents. Only weeks later, on March 30th, 2002, the Queen Mother died at 101. Queen Elizabeth II lost her sister in February and her mother in March. After that, Sarah's bond with the Queen deepened. Then came the objects. David and Sarah inherited Margaret's estate valued in the millions. But inheritance tax created a practical problem. In 2006, many items from Princess Margaret's collection were auctioned at Christie's. Jewels, furniture, art silver, and personal pieces moved from private rooms into public sale. The Poltimore tiara became one of the most watched items. That was her pattern. Sarah kept the beauty of Margaret's inheritance and left behind the chaos. She kept the eye for art, the love of taste, the intelligence, and the loyalty to family. She rejected the hunger for attention, the emotional storms, and the belief that being seen could make a person safe. She did not erase her mother. She edited the inheritance. In 2011, Prince William married Catherine Middleton at Westminster Abbey. In 2012, Queen Elizabeth II marked 60 years on the throne with the Diamond Jubilee. Prince George was born in 2013, Princess Charlotte in 2015, and Prince Louis in 2018. That same year, Prince Harry married Meghan Markle at St. George's Chapel. Again, royal hope came wrapped in ceremony. Sarah remained present, graceful, and away from the center. On April 9, 2021, Prince Philip died at Windsor Castle at the age of 99. The Queen sat alone at his funeral in St. George's Chapel under pandemic restrictions. In the months that followed, Sarah's closeness to Elizabeth became more meaningful. She could offer companionship without fuss, memory without demand, and affection without agenda. Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral on September 8, 2022 at the age of 96, after 70 years on the throne. Britain mourned a sovereign. Sarah mourned an aunt who had shown her that dignity could be stronger than drama. With Elizabeth's death, the old world of Sarah's childhood closed. King George VI, the Queen Mother, Princess Margaret, Prince Philip, and Elizabeth herself had all passed into memory. On May 6, 2023, King Charles III was crowned at Westminster Abbey. Sarah attended as family, not as a public performer or a power figure. Through Sarah and David, Princess Margaret remained present in the royal story, no longer only as scandal, but as ancestry, memory, and blood. There was no single moment when Lady Sarah Chatto walked away from Princess Margaret. It was 1,000 quiet choices. Choosing school as refuge, choosing art as language, choosing Daniel over drama, choosing a wedding without national theatre, choosing children over public appetite, choosing to care for Margaret in illness without returning to childhood fear, choosing grief without performance. Everyone knew why. They had seen what Margaret could demand. They had seen how brightly and painfully she burned. Sarah did not hate that flame. She learned how far away she needed to stand. She walked away from volatility, not from love. She walked away from performance, not from family. She walked away from the belief that a woman must be seen to matter. Princess Margaret wanted life to feel grand enough to justify its disappointments. Lady Sarah wanted life to feel peaceful enough to survive them. In a family trained for display, she chose privacy. In the end, her retreat was not coldness, it was survival. It was mercy. It was the quiet triumph of a daughter who understood that staying too close would mean disappearing completely.